Hello, class. So, welcome to today's lecture. And today we'll be talking about inequalities and disparities in a comparative world picture, in which what is happening all over the world. So, before we dive into the world picture, we must try to revisit the concept behind inequality. What is inequality? So, inequality is it's a state of not being equal, especially in terms of status, access to rights, access to information, access to basic necessities, access to basic infrastructure facilities like water, sanitation, electricity, and nowadays, right, internet, and maybe an inequality in opportunities or capabilities. So it is a concept very much at the heart of social justice, or you can say urban planning theories. Now, inequality uh, may be defined in different dimension. It all depends upon from which dimension are we looking at. So from these dimensions, these include income, assets, capabilities, happiness or these opportunities, and that generally inequalities is when we talk about inequality, it means economic inequality or income inequality. But now broadly, inequality also have the it also incorporates or the concept of inequality within the living condition in an area. So development theory is largely concerned with inequalities in standards of living, such as unequal income or wealth, unequal access to education or health facilities, and due to the growing poverty, inequality is also seen in terms of water, food insecurity, so nutrition part as well. So these concept of inequality, development, and poverty, they are very much intrinsically connected concepts. Which brings us to the types of inequality. So generally, we see that income inequality is one of the main component or the largely focused part of inequality literature. Then, gender equality has been revived in the Sustainable Development Goals, and some racial inequality is also there. So, there's some different types of inequality. So, the main thing which arises is, why do we study inequality? So, inequality is one of the most important issues in development, uh, because from philosophical point of view, it is seen as unjust phenomena, and there is empirical evidence or ground evidence which indicates that it is inequality is basically negatively influencing your well-being, which well-being by well-being, I mean generally social stability or economic growth and prosperity. So it is evidence, it is found out by many researchers that it affects economic growth. So inequality is there. It increases poverty and access to facilities or basic necessity, which can give it, you can say, decrease in health facilities to the poor, or educational opportunities to the poor, which will increase your inequality, and that would ultimately help. Inequality will kind of create some economic powerhouses, some families, and this which will gives you like which the rich will get richer and the poor will get poorer, and that might also increase in crime, conflicts, revolts, and insurgency in the areas. So inequality has become important. Although we can argue that inequality is an inherent part of capitalistic society, but the increasing uh, addition of some of the socialistic concepts into the capitalistic systems have pointed out that inequality is a problem which we need to address. Now, there is two terms which usually seen in the literature: inequality and disparity. So both, the word means the same, the meanings behind is the same, but mostly in the literature, inequality is seen as a term of in terms of economy. So economic inequality or income inequality, whereas disparity, it is more or less more concerned with development disparity, or you can say some sort of physical disparity. So in development, urban development phenomena, we generally use the word development disparity to signify infrastructural or socioeconomic differences, whereas inequality is most of the time in focus towards financial, monetary, or economic inequality. And which leads to another, we can say, if we want to see it on the scale, so it is, you can say, inequality is between two people, or it can be between countries or within countries, within regions. So that are some special scales of inequality. So are inequalities bad? Are inequalities, they are only, the word inequality implies a negative meaning? So no. So it is, there are also some good inequalities, which are increasing incentives for innovation, entrepreneurship, and ultimately your economic growth. Whereas bad inequalities creates imbalances or obstacles for the marginalized or deprived people to receive proper education and access to facilities that can hurt your economic development of the region. So both are there. So we are very much focused on reducing your bad inequalities. So we would now like to talk about some debate on inequalities. That, is it important, or should we, uh, how do we try to understand and mitigate this inequality or reduce these inequalities? So the first thing which comes to the mind is the link between inequality and economic growth. So generally, since the industrial revolution, the general view has been that on average, people want higher incomes, and a large number of good jobs were the best way to achieve those goals and ultimately help in faster economic growth. Now, that brings us to the question is that, does do these concepts, economic growth and inequality, how do they correlate? How do they affect each other? And reducing inequality, will it affect your economic growth positively or negatively? Or reducing inequality is sustainable for for a progressive or a balanced economic growth? So the progress or this linkage has been researched by many researchers, many scientists, and they have uh, come up with different theories to explain this relationship. And some said that there is no relationship, or they do not impact each other even. There is no link between them. While some uh, scientists or economists advocate that it is in the early phase of economic growth of a country, it is very important. While at the later stage, it will then negatively affect your inequality. So temporal or time wise effect of inequality will vary. It will be positive in the start, but it will reduce in the future. And it is the one of the most famous theory, which is also called inverted theory. Then another thing, which another observation made by another study was that it is positive. Inequality should be there, and it is very positive for a short run, but for the longer run or the larger time period, it is negative. uh, while there are some other social scientists as well, which have forecasted that there is a positive correlation in which inequality would decrease and would also positively affect your economic growth. While some researchers have found out that some aspects of inequality are positive or some aspects are negative. So depending upon your context, dimension, and maybe some even your area or your subjects, that will determine or which dimension of inequality are you talking about, right? So they will positively or negatively impact the economic growth. But overall or generally, most of the research shows that in the long term, right? In the keyword here is the long term. Inequality is negatively related to the economic growth, and the countries with less disparity would have more middle class and will have a more you can say sustainable or a stable economic growth. So this is the famous inverted U Kuznets curve, in which your inequality, which is generally measured in terms of Gini coefficient, we'll be talking about in the coming lectures how to calculate this Gini coefficient, and how the higher the value is, higher the inequality. So in the start, when Gini coefficient is increasing, so is your gross national product per capita. So inequality is very good in the beginning, very positive, and it grows. And at certain limit, after a certain time, it will then negatively affect your economic growth. So it was a very good hypothesis, or you can say where one of the pioneer scientists, Kuznets, was the first one to hypothesize the relationship between inequality and economic growth. It was also made, he published his research in terms of Latin American countries. He proposed that generally it is positive and it will gradually grow negative in the long term. Now, factors contributing to the income inequality. So that all depends upon your. Now there are some various factors of inequality, in which the first one is your personal capabilities or your abilities in which you can achieve something. So about natural born, you can say genius. And then talking about where a worker area, more like if we work more, maybe we'll earn more. Maybe if we have access to education, we will have more good development skills, and maybe we'll raise our productivity and our worth, and that might reduce inequality. So some people are generally risk takers, some are risk averse, some contributed to the luck sometimes, and sometimes is the wage discrimination between particularly your gender inequality is predominantly by wage is enhanced by the wage discrimination. So these are some of the general uh, factors which can contribute towards income inequality. It can increase your inequality. So uh, but what about from urban planning perspective? So there was a change in trend from economic oriented inequality measurement or disparity towards more human development component. So traditionally, inequality has been always been measured or seen in terms of economic growth or poverty. But that view was challenged by Martha Sen, the Nobel laureate, which he gave a capability approach in which he emphasized that instead of seeing economy, you should measure inequality from person point of view. So from human component point of view. So what is each person able to do and be? Okay. So he basically proposed a change in paradigm in which con- converted from concept of economic development towards your human development. So he was the first one of a pioneer that he gave the famous Human Development Index with Mehboob Haq about Human Development Index. So that is HDI index, and which is a composite of life expectancy, education, and income. And they gave the Human Development Index, which is a very famous index. You might have heard about it. And there were also another other indexes as well, which would try to measure some different uh, inequalities in terms of different sectors, or you can say dimensions. But HDI was one of the most prominent one. And quite recently, the multidimensional poverty index has emerged one of a powerful tool to measure inequality within the human development component. In case of Pakistan, Pakistan ranks as of 2020. Pakistan ranked 154 out of 189 countries, which were included in the analysis. And Pakistan, out of one, Pakistan's score is zero point 0.5. So we are just one is the ideal and zero is the worst. So we are just in the middle. We are not too much towards positive, negative, or too much. So the more the value, it is always ranked between 0 to 1. So these are some of the top 10 countries in the world which have one of the highest HDI value. And in terms of multi-dimensional poverty index developed by the uh, I- Oxford University of Oxford under their Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiatives and UNDP, they came up with the more uh, right other indexes were more focused towards your economic aspects. So the multi-dimensional poverty index, because if we recall, poverty is generally measured in terms of income, right? So in this index, they basically proposed that it should be measured in terms of deprivation from some certain necessities. So if these necessities are not met, then these households or that head count or that has household is basically poor. So that measured in poverty in case of Pakistan, you can see observe spatial differences in the country in which your northern Punjab or you can say central Punjab is more developed as compared to rest of the Pakistan, and we can say a little bit of Naushera, Charsadda, Malakad and Mardan in the KPK is more developed relatively to the KPK, while Balochistan, except Quetta, is more or less deprived. About 70%, more than 70% of people are living under the poverty line. And as we go into Sindh, you see in the Karachi is the only developed which has the least poverty, less than 10%, and fall, whereas the rest of Sindh is also deprived of more than 50 to 70%, more than that even. So this is the current situation of poverty in Pakistan. So main point in terms of urban planning or what urban planner or regional developers can do, we'll be talking about development of we'll be talking about development inequalities or disparities as we call it. So what is it? So the goal 10 of sustainable development goals, if you'll call it, is focused on reducing inequalities worldwide. And how can we do it? So the main point is that uh, the existence of rural-urban disparities in Pakistan, at least, remains an important theoretical and practical problem, which is hindering your sustainable growth of city. Uh, it is especially uh, relevant because this inequality would then this development inequality between two regions, unequal distribution of resources would take place, and that would be uh, very much problematic in the future. So for appropriate and justifiable allocation of resources and funds, we must reduce these inequalities. So, larger the development gap between, let's say, two cities, or let's say between urban or rural, or we can say even urban, rural, or peri-urban, it tends to hinder your country's economic growth. So, as a developing countries, we are much more concerned with uh, s- the sustainable economic growth, and cities are often seen as engines of economic growth. So, and they are generally, therefore, they are preferred over their counterparts, the rural areas. So, governments like in developing countries generally focus on urban core development rather than suburbs or rural areas. And that leads to an imbalanced development and inequality, which can significantly affect the country's sustainable economic growth and efficient allocation of resources. Uh, there is an increasing need to assess inequalities and economic growth for like deriving some kind of poverty reduction approaches, which are already prevalent in the literature. So, generally, this development disparity, or let's say within urban or rural, within urban, it's also very much apparent that lot of slums and marginalized communities are living in an area. Why are they not having the same access to the same facilities in terms of maybe such socioeconomic growth, infrastructure, developments, and quality of life? Why are they not getting it? So, to reducing that, a lot of inequality is apparent in some mega cities of the world, or big, you can say metropolitans. So, simultaneously, some like condominiums, and at the same time, just over the wall, you have favelas, or we call it squatter settlements or slums. Then moving on, like there are some picture which shows that there is an inequality within a city, and these are some real pictures. I'll go in some more slides and you will just see. So this picture shows trends between global inequality in the world in terms of built-up densities and light emissions, and these different colors signifies different types of development densities, uh, and inhabit like poorly lit or diffuse settlements, infrastructures, deprived region, more slums. So this kind of thing. So overall, you can see that this is Europe, and it shows diverse spatial patterns, and you can see white lights are the main cities. In terms of Pakistan, you can see the report points out that India is better lit than Bangladesh and Pakistan, and these some regions, especially New Delhi and these northern areas of uh, India, is also lit by white, and Pakistan is generally you have seen a lot of development along the Indus River, and this is the situation in the world. So thank you. And the next lecture we'll be talking about how to measure such inequalities, and then we maybe will go through some case studies. Thank you for joining today. Thank you very much.